I'm Adam Long, the Managing Director at ThunderLabs, and you're listening to the ThunderCast. I'm in the studio today with Mike Knapp, whose work is so nice. He's worked for Google twice, but he's actually well known for branching across incredible software products. He was one of the founders of Shoes of Prey, the Australian startup that took over the world with custom-made shoes, and he's now deep into the world of generative AI and applications, practical applications for businesses. Today, we discuss what it's like to quit Google to launch a startup, whether it matters that AI feels like a human, and good advice for anyone looking to get started in the world of AI. Here's Mike.
Hi, good to be here, Adam.
Mike, first there was Kasparov getting beaten by Deep Blue. Then Watson took on Jeopardy. Now ChatGPT has taken over the world. And I can't help but wonder, are we still on the way up the hype curve, or are we actually at the point where AI is finally becoming useful? Where are we at?
I think we're just at the very beginning. Yeah, we haven't seen anything yet. I saw a tweet this morning comparing Midjourney last year to Midjourney today, and it's just absolutely breathtaking. There's just so much going on. It's like a Cambrian explosion of ideas and creativity, and yeah, it's a really exciting time. It feels like the internet back was in the 1990s.
So you've taken big, bold steps into the AI space, and with the coming on of ChatGPT, started a new organization, Model. And what is Model about? Tell me what Model is.
Yeah, so Model is a way to retrain ChatGPT on your own data. So ChatGPT is amazing at telling you answers, but sometimes those answers aren't correct, and that it's actually been hallucinated. So what I do is I allow you to upload your own data into my program Model, and it learns from that. And so when you ask a question, then it will give you the answer that you should get back to your question.
So the way it's portrayed on the website, and I've had to play with it, it's a very cool tool. Very interesting, the way you can actually train it on content that you decide. Where do you see this actually being used?
Yeah, so today it's being used on mainly small businesses. So they put it on their FAQ page, and so people can interact with their FAQs rather than having to read a long document. They can just ask whatever they want. And it works in any language as well. So you can ask it in Chinese, and even if you haven't trained it in Chinese, it will be able to respond back in Chinese or any language.
That's clever. Now, chatbots aren't new. They've been around for a while. So what's the leap forward, or what's the innovation here?
Yeah, so the leap forward is that the technology is so good now that you don't need to really train the bot in the way you used to. So old chatbots were sort of more like phone trees, where you would sort of program, if the person says this, then go to this branch and then do some logic. The bots are now good enough that you don't need to do that. So you just give it a whole bunch of information that kind of works it out and responds in an appropriate way, which is really great.
What makes that possible?
Well, I guess it's the millions and millions of dollars that OpenAI spent training these bots, and a little bit of smarts that I've programmed into Model to help with that as well. So the way it's working is it's taking all your information, putting it into a database, and then when a question comes in, it's doing what we call vector search. So it's looking in a multidimensional space to try and find the correct answers, and then it's providing those to ChatGPT to say, hey, which of these is actually the correct answer, and can you rephrase it in the way that the customer would expect? So yeah, there's a little bit of smarts going on there to help OpenAI get the right answer.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So vector search, explain that to me like I'm a 35-year-old who hasn't studied computer science.
Okay, so vector search, if you can imagine a three-dimensional space, and we can plot different points in this three-dimensional space, and what we're going to do is take a piece of text. So let's say the cat sat on the mat, and we're going to plot that into three-dimensional space. And so using some algorithm, we would find the appropriate space and the point in three-dimensional space for the cat sat on the mat. And we can then plot other points. So the cat sat on the rug, for example, we might plot that into three-dimensional space. And it just happens that it's very, very close to that first point in vector space. Or we could say the cat sat on the mat in Chinese, and it would sort of go into a very similar position. So when we have a question come in, we can then plot the question into three-dimensional space, and we can look at the nearest neighbors around that so we can pull out those nearest neighbors. So that's basically vector search. It's not happening in 3 dimensions. It's happening in 1,500 dimensions, which is a little hard to get your brain around. But
it's a little hard to imagine. I can't quite make sense of the Lego bricks that make that.
That's it. But yeah, it works, and that's kind of the basis of what model's doing.
So you've got your vector search database that you've created, and that's really the proprietary stuff here. I mean, the interface you've created is so simple. Just upload some documents and somehow some magic happens. Classic Arthur C. Clarke, any technology indistinguishable, sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And I've got to say that's what it felt like playing with it the first time. And then you've got ChatGPT, which has come along. So this feels like an interesting step in the evolution of AI in that you haven't had to create the base large language model to make this happen. You're able to use something else. And I'm reminded of Kevin Kelly's book, The Inevitable, which came out in 2015 and predicted a future where AI is almost like a utility, like electricity. And it's not that everybody needs to build their own AI. You can just access it on tap. Flick a switch. You've got it in your home, in your business. Is that what's happening now with tools like ChatGPT?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I think people haven't even realized the potential power of what we've got today, let alone what's going to come down the pike. I'm always shocked when I go to dinner parties and we're talking about ChatGPT and people are waxing lyrical about it. And then I say, "Oh, have you used it?" And they're like, "Oh, no, I've never used it." And you're like, "Oh, you should really try it. It's actually amazing." But I think, yeah, more and more people are obviously starting to embrace it now. But even learning how to use ChatGPT properly is a real skill, and it takes some time. I've been playing with it for many, many months, and I'm still learning every day and how to push it even further. Yeah, and there's some really, really good tips that OpenAI have shared as well. So one really important tip is to say, please think step by step so that you get the correct answer. And that's kind of a magic phrase that will help ChatGPT actually give you the correct answer rather than jumping to the wrong conclusion straight away.
Interesting. How do you find it compares to talking to a human?
It's a little bit more robotic, I think, than talking to a human. Like when you first use it, you're obviously blown away. But if you're using it for months, you sort of start to see the patterns. You can actually improve that a little bit. So if you give it a writing sample that you want it to copy, it will try and do a style transfer from the writing sample. But yeah, generally it's a little bit robotic. But yeah, it still works pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. It's certainly a lot of fun. There's no surprises. It got to 100 million users in its first couple of days, 2 months perhaps. I'll have to look up that figure, but it was one of the fastest adoption of any new product. And that was even before they had a financial model. So is it expensive to use ChatGPT at a corporate scale?
If you're using the GPT-4, the prices will add up quickly. But if you think about in comparison to in comparison to someone's time, then it's actually a relatively small amount. And something that might take a day or two for me to write a document might take me a day or two. For ChatGPT, I can generate something really amazing, for $1 or $2. So, yeah, I think it's really inexpensive when you look at it like that.
Yeah, fascinating. So we had some ThunderLabs trivia the other week. We do it every so often to keep our remote team connected and all together, and had a whole section on acronyms, which the team hated when they discovered that laser is an acronym and so is scuba. And of course, GPT is the acronym on everybody's tip of everybody's lips at the moment. So generative pre-trained transformer. And it's interesting listening to the OpenAI CEO talk about how much pre-training actually goes into it, which was actually a human element, I understand. That groups of people would see answers, multiple answers that GPT would produce, and they'd say, I think that answer better answers my question, or that feels like a more natural response. So thousands and thousands of hours went into pre-training to get this to a point where it can act like a human. But of course, then the gap is it doesn't actually know anything about your company or your particular use case or your particular individual that you're trying to represent. So how much training does it actually require for it to become as good as a customer service person answering questions on the front desk?
I think we're still a while away from that. So being able to interface with your systems and process refunds and all of that good stuff, that's still a while down the track. But for a limited amount of information, so if you've got a finite set of questions that people commonly ask, It's going to do a really, really great job of that. And one of the big limitations of ChatGPT at the moment is that it doesn't continue to learn. So as you need to give it more information, basically. It's not going to suddenly intuit that, hey, actually, maybe that's wrong, and maybe we need to change the answer to this question. It's not going to do that. It's not that clever. But, of course, down the track, I think that will come.
That's fascinating. So ChatGPT 3, 4, they kind of have birth dates, don't they? Which are, it's more like graduation dates. At this point, they knew almost everything that was on the internet. But anything that's happened after that, geez, don't ask it about what happened last week in say, France, because it doesn't have the context around it. So it sounds like what you've done with Model is create a portal for updating that information with stuff that's relevant for your particular use case.
Exactly, yeah. So you would update the document that you're using to train your bot and then just simply re-upload it and delete the old one. And then it's got that new information ready to go, which is very handy for people. And so it means you can deploy in 5-10 minutes if you've got the document ready.
Yep, version 1 took me about 5 minutes actually for the Thunderbot.
Nice.
it was good fun. So ThunderLabs is working with a stack of large-scale clients, mid-sized, privately owned enterprises. There's a bit of a mix there, but they tend to be organizations that already have large groups of people working in parts of their business. How can large organizations start adopting this? Is this a massive transformation project with a go live in 2 years, or is there incremental steps they can take towards embracing AI?
Yeah, so I think the first step would be to use it internally for something. I've heard of, and I'm not going to name the company, but a very well-known company that's used Model internally with their documents, so for sales processes. And yeah, they were sort of so blown away with it that they were emailing the CEO, this kind of well-known CEO, to say like, hey, we should be using this more. And another large company is trialing Model for some internal processes. So I think that's a good way to play around with it. You have to be careful, I guess, of the information that you're sharing with Model and by extension, OpenAI. So I wouldn't put anything super confidential in there. But yeah, things like sales processes or customer support policies or things like that, if they were to leak, that wouldn't be disastrous. Model certainly won't be sharing it with anyone. But yeah, OpenAI, the data goes to OpenAI. It also goes to my vector store database supplier. And I have no reason to not trust them. But yeah, that could be a concern to people that are looking at this.
Yeah, okay. So it sounds like the applications are best for publicly available information already, which almost treats this like another interface, right? I mean, we started off with brochures, and then brochures turned into individual web pages, and then we got complex amounts of information that needed to be searched, and then early 2010s, apparently it was all going to be video because we don't have the attention span to read, but now we don't have the attention span to watch video, so we watch video with subtitles.
Yes.
Which is kind of ironic. And now we're at the point where we don't want something pre-prepared for us. We just want an answer.
Yes.
Answer to our question.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, being able to chat with a bot is a lot more convenient than having to scan even a relatively short FAQ. I'd much rather just ask the bot exactly what's on my mind.
Yeah. So there's a lot of AI ethics discussion going on at the moment. What copyright breaches might have happened in the process of training these models? Does it count as a copyright breach? And the questions are largely unanswered here. Certainly in the artist communities, there's uproar at image creators like Midjourney that have been trained on other artists' work and produce work in their style, which humans have copied each other's styles for thousands of years, but now it's being done on an industrial AI scale. So when it comes to something like this, where someone might want to engage or interface with a company, a product or service, I was wondering, up at late last night, how would you tell whether it's a human or not? And then actually, does it even matter?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a very philosophical question. You sort of think about Searle's Chinese room philosophical sort of question that he posed about, if there was a person in a room and you input some Chinese characters and the person in the room has some instructions on how to process the Chinese and spits out Chinese, is that person really communicating in Chinese? Or are they just sort of manipulating tokens or symbols? Ultimately, I don't think it really matters whether the computer understands exactly what we're talking about. But yeah, I think that it's a reality that this technology is here to stay. And I think of technology like gravity. It's like water flowing down a mountain. It's going to flow in a particular direction. And Yeah, I think AI and generative AI is here to stay, and it's a reality we're going to have to live with. No matter what the philosophical dimension of it is.
Absolutely, it's here to stay. And one thought that occurred to me is it's actually giving a voice to something that previously hasn't had its own voice, which is the corporation. And so we're going way back in time. We've recently done the company directors course, and that had me going deep into the history of corporations. People didn't like the idea of corporations or companies for a very long time, because the idea was, how can a legal fiction own property, make decisions, and represent itself? And in fact, the word corporation comes from the Latin for body. It's we've given a human body to something that doesn't have a human body. And now along comes ChatGPT, and something that is a legal fiction, a company, now has its own voice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. And well, I think the other implication for companies and going in the other direction is that the reason people banded together to form companies or partnerships was that it lowered the cost of administration in doing business. So instead of us all having to buy a photocopier to be a lawyer, we could band together and create a firm of people that's got a photocopier, and then we could have a marketing team and they can service all of us. But of course, in the digital age with OpenAI as your business partner, maybe you don't need to band together with people. Maybe we'll see a lot more solo entrepreneurs going out for themselves, where everything is automated through AI, through the marketing. Midjourney's producing the images for you, and ChatGPT's doing the customer support and the sales for you. Yeah, so it's a brave new world. I'm sure people will still incorporate and operate under companies, but yeah, maybe we'll see a lot smaller companies in the future.
I'm interested in whether you see the role of AI in the future as an automation tool, as an assistant, or as almost like a colleague for someone. And just to distinguish those, automation being it's taking something where there's a known process, humans are doing it repetitively, great, AI can do it repetitively. Assistant is the humans setting the direction, please help me move in that direction, through to colleague, where independent ideas, independent thought is coming, and you're actually collaborating rather than instructing. Where is this going, and where are we now?
I think it'll be all three. And today I use ChatGPT in the same way. So I use GPT-4, and I'll get it to write documents for me, but I'll also get it to spitball on my business and generate ideas. And often those ideas are really, really good. I'm like blown away. The one trick I have found, in addition to the thing I mentioned before about please think step by step, is to give it a lot of context. So often what I'll do is I'll write a document that summarizes my whole business, and I'll insert that as the first message in the chain. I'll say, please read this document as background briefing, and then I'll ask it a bunch of questions about my business. But you can then easily take that process and do automations, or you can do customer support. So I think it'll be possible to use this in many, many different ways, and we're kind of just scratching the surface today in terms of what's possible.
It's exciting. So I want to talk a little bit about your personal story, Mike, as well. You've been a Google engineer, worked on some pretty incredible products over the years. Tell me about your work with Google.
Well, actually, I started my career as a lawyer many, many, many years ago, and then decided that wasn't for me. And then I moved to Google first not as a software engineer, as a salesperson back in 2005. And this was when the Google office was very, very small. So I think I was like number 14 or something in Australia. And I was making a lot of the sales calls. It was very funny because we had an answering machine back in those days, and people would call up and leave a message and say, hey, I've heard about this Google thing. Can I, someone call me back? And so I'd call them back, and then they just wouldn't believe I was from Google. They were just like, there's no way you're from Google. You've got an Australian accent for a start. And I'm like, no, I really work for Google. And that was a lot of fun. And actually, a funny story is when I first joined Google, on the first day, they had an ideas box. And I was like, I'm going to think of an idea today. And so I wrote an idea down in this ideas box. And the idea was, when you're writing an email, and if you forget to attach an attachment, then it should say, hey, did you mean to attach an attachment?
This sounds suddenly familiar.
Yeah. So I wrote that idea in, and a few weeks later, a Gmail engineer contacted me, and she was like, that was really cool. I'm going to build that. Is that cool? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. And I was like, wow, this company is really amazing. And then it actually got launched, and And so it's a thing.
That
today.
was you?
Yeah, that was me.
Oh my God. Thank you. You've saved my rear end more times than you can imagine. I think that's a thank you from several billion others. Wow.
Yeah. So I just kept having ideas. It was like a really fun place to idea. And that sort of inspired me. And I eventually wanted to create a CRM because I was working on the sales team. So I pitched that to my boss. And I was like, hey, I want to create a CRM for Google. At that stage, AdWords didn't have a CRM. And she was like, oh, okay, well, I don't know if that's possible. And I was like, well, if it's not possible, I'm going to quit because I really think we need a CRM. Anyway, so they thought about it for another week and then they said, okay, you can join engineering. So I moved across to engineering and built one of the first CRMs and in the process got moved to America to work with another team. And that was really good. And then spent some time in China with Google and went back to America to work on Google Reader. And then decided I wanted to leave and work on Shoes of Prey with Michael and Jody. So yeah, quit my job to go and do that for 8 years.
For Shoes of Prey. So for those listening, Shoes of Prey was the absolute darling of the Australian startup world. Fascinating business. I think you raised 25 million over the course of the business, served customers all over the world. It's a really fascinating story. And it was actually the first time you and I crossed paths because of this step that you'd made into personalization. So tell me about personalization and shoes and how that comes together.
Yeah. It was a weird one telling my parents that I was quitting Google to go and work on ladies' shoes. But at the time we weren't really looking to start a shoe company necessarily. We were looking for purple cows. So we'd read Seth Godin's book, Purple Cow, and we sort of believed what he was saying, that you need to have a remarkable product. So we thought, okay, let's brainstorm remarkable products. So we had this long list of potential purple cows and
a purple cow being the cow that you would stop the car for as you're driving past the farm, not just another black and white cow invisible by its sameness.
Exactly. So yeah, we had lots of potential purple cows, but one idea just kept floating to the top, and that was design your own shoes on the internet for women. And yeah, after experimenting with a few test orders with women at Google, we thought, okay, this is the one. And so yeah, we went all in on that.
Brilliant. And then what happened?
Well, initially, not a lot. I mean, it took us, we sold a few shoes, but it took us a few years to really get going. It was amazing that people would buy $350 pairs of shoes on the internet from just a terrible drawing that I had put together. So we knew we were onto something, but yeah, it took us a long time to get the marketing right. But by the time we raised the first $3 million, I think we'd sold a few $1 million worth of shoes ourselves, bootstrapped.
Brilliant. You had, over the course of the business, you had pop-ups in David Jones, you were selling around the world, manufacturing in multiple places, offices in multiple places. It's quite a journey. You decided to leave a few years into the business.
Yeah, so I spent 3 years in China working on our factory, building that with my brother Dave and some other people, Brendan, and moved back to Los Angeles where the company was headquartered at the time, and decided, this wasn't what I envisaged my life being, and decided to leave the company. I thought initially I wanted to do startups again, so I went and I actually created Model. It was the same name, but a different product. I was trying to do voice social networks, which at the time seemed crazy, but actually if I stuck it through to COVID, it would have been a good thing. But anyway, and then after sort of being a solo entrepreneur for a year and not getting anywhere, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to Google and become a product manager.
And Google welcomed you back with open arms.
They did. Yeah. And I had a really fantastic 4 years there. It's a really great place. I often said it was like moving back in with your parents, going back to Google, because free food and a warm bed.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The free food and yoga classes go a long way, don't they? And look, it's fascinating. You certainly clearly not short of ideas in your career, your work, or just about anywhere where you've ended up. So the arc of Shoes of Prey eventually came to an end, and a lot of the analysis or commentary afterwards was that there seemed to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance in the mass market, and the niche that you'd done so well in captivating around needing custom size, shape, material shoes, and the expression of creating your own design didn't necessarily translate into the mass market. What are your thoughts on that, looking back at the experience?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think, if you think about it in terms of crossing the chasm, as sort of the famous book talks about, there were a certain number of women in the world that knew how to design shoes and were good at designing shoes and had the money to design shoes. And we probably gobbled up, the easy, low-hanging fruit in terms of that demographic. And then we were trying to push this onto the mass market, and they, for whatever reason, it wasn't something they wanted to do all the time. So a lot of people wanted to do it for specific occasions. So like bridal, I think that was a really specific occasion where women want to spend a bit of money. And actually the thing that they wanted to do was to be able to stamp their name in their shoes and and their partner's name and the date of the wedding. So we could have, I think, in retrospect, focused just on that niche and maybe charged twice as much, made the shoes better as well. I think that probably would have been a more sustainable business, because we were trying to be all things to all people. We were trying to sell prom shoes. We were trying to sell office shoes. We were trying to sell shoes to my grandmother. We were trying to sell bridal shoes. And we never really got the marketing right. We never really solved one customer's problem perfectly. We sort of did an average job at a whole bunch of things. So I think, if I had my time again, I would focus just on one niche and do it really, really well.
Well, all the women in my life said your shoes were freaking amazing. So I think you're being a little too harsh on yourself. But so from a 0 to 1 perspective, creating a new startup and a new business, you took on multiple challenges there, because you're in the software space, the hardware space, and actually it was custom personalized products. So not only were you building new markets with a new idea, new software, and then having to build a custom supply chain, that sounds really hard. Would you do it again?
It was really fun as well. And the team that we had was incredible. I think we created a really amazing culture. I think a lot of us look back fondly on those times when we were trying to solve those problems. So I think I would do it again. Yeah, it was a really, net was an amazing experience. So, and learned a huge amount. Didn't make much money, unfortunately, for our poor investors, but did certainly learn a lot.
It sounds like an incredible journey that you're on, quite the roller coaster with highs, lows, and everything in between, and fascinating ride. Afterwards, you wrote a blog post that went viral, which in a nutshell said, if you want to make money, don't do a startup. Kind of counter to the prevailing zeitgeist of the time, where I don't know, you do software and then you become a billionaire, and Facebook will buy you for $1 billion a year after you start Instagram. What are you going to sell to Facebook? And yet here you are, and you've left Google a second time to start a new venture.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I think I was frustrated at the time that I wasn't making traction on the idea I was progressing, Model V1, which was the audio network, and having gone through the Choose a Prey experience and realizing that wasn't going to really work out. I was feeling very disillusioned at the world and my choices that I'd made. And I was also part of sort of the startup scene in Brisbane as well, and I was sort of seeing a lot of patterns with entrepreneurs as well, like sort of in the same mindset that I was maybe 10 years ago, where I'm gonna get rich from this, and most people don't get rich from starting a startup. You get rich by sort of striking gold occasionally, but it's very rare that startups become big, important things. There's lots of good that comes out of a startup as well. So the lessons learned, but you do need to get sort of every dimension right in the Rubik's Cube to make it work, and often it's hard on your first attempt to do that. We talked about purple cows earlier, and I think actually what I'm starting to realize is that distribution is more important than product.
Which, interestingly, was the title of a recent blog post from you as well. You're back on the blogging sphere again.
Yes. And looking back on my first experience with Model, I think, that thought didn't even cross my mind, that distribution was more important than product. I was a very product-focused founder, where I just thought if I create a great product, then people will come. And I don't think that's true anymore. So I think if you've got incredible distribution and you've got a decent product, then maybe you can make it in the startup world. But at the time, I think that thought hadn't actually occurred to me.
The more we learn, huh?
Yeah.
So it's interesting in your conversations with ThunderLabs and exploring all the different ways generative AI can be rolled out. A lot of the companies that we interface with already have that distribution, as in they're serving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people already. Now, you've had an incredible experience with Google, which is known for taking on new ideas and making them happen. And it's certainly one of the big complaints in a lot of large organizations that the opposite is true, that ideas don't get tested or explored. They get put into a 12-month business case, which may or may not get funded in the following 12-month cycle. Do you have any advice for those people, the ones who have the ideas at the level that you do, and there's others out there that just don't feel like they're getting heard? How do you get ideas heard and underway in these large organizations?
Well, I had that a little bit with my experience at Google with the CRM. And I think what I learned from that process is, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission in some cases. So if you create a prototype, like if you try to ask people can I create a prototype? People will say, oh yeah, maybe later, or we'll think about that. But if you actually show someone the thing and go, look, it works, then it's very hard to argue with that.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So
sounds like the ThunderLabs philosophy.
Yeah.
Pilot first and use that as the business case. So thank you. I'd like to say we'd paid you for that, but that was spot on. Amazing. Mike, where do you draw inspiration from? Is there a particular book, author, movie, thought leader that really lights you up and you'd recommend to others?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I used to be a very voracious reader, reading sort of 60 books a year until recently, and I've really dropped off. So I don't have any books to recommend, but I have been taking, there's a guy, Daniel Fasalo, I took his Small Bets course recently. And that's kind of opened my eyes to using Twitter as a random number generator. So as a way of gaining inspiration. So I think that perspective is very interesting. So and I do that every day. So I sort of just scan Twitter for random ideas.
So using Twitter as a random number generator. Say more on that.
Yeah. So the idea is that Daniel's philosophy is that you want to have a portfolio of different things that you're working on. And you want to allow time in your day to be inspired by randomness. And for him, and for me, I think Twitter is that random number generator where you go and you might be exposed to a tweet about generative AI, or you might be exposed to a tweet about a new business model or something else. And being exposed to those kind of like very random things may prompt ideas for you to work on down the track. And so, setting aside time to scan Twitter for that purpose, not just to sort of browse and waste time, but to actually be inspired by what's going on in the world. And so, I do that every day, probably a little bit too much sometimes, but that's my random number generator that inspires me to come up with new things. And Model is a direct result of that. So I think I would have seen some tweets about how people were building these bots and went and explored it more.
Fantastic. Mike, we're coming to the end of our time here. For all the listeners out there, do you have any asks, requests, or things you'd like to share with them?
No asks or requests. But if you want to follow along, I'm on currentdraft.com. That's my blog. I'm going to try and blog a little bit more regularly. So come and join me there.
You're a good writer. Recommend at currentdraft.com. Mike, thank you so much for coming in and having a chat today. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Adam Long, the Managing Director at ThunderLabs, and you're listening to the ThunderCast.